Welcome to the Aviation Safety Community Podcast, presented by the Aviation Safety Community and Flight Logics, dedicated to progressing aviation safety, leadership, training, and research in the air and on the ground. In today's episode, our host, Grenville Hudson, interviews Rosemary Clancy, a clinical sleep psychologist at the Sydney Sleep Centre, about how sleep affects the world of aviation.
Hello and welcome to the Aviation Safety Community Podcast. I'm Grenville Hudson and with me is Rosemary Clancy, who is a Sydney-based clinical psychologist treating sleep, mood, anxiety and substance use disorders. Hello Rosemary, how are you?
Very good. Thank you, Grenville. Thanks for having me on.
That's a pleasure. And thank you for coming on the show. Rosemary, can you just give us a bit of background in yourself and what your career has been to date?
So I've been involved in mental health for at least 25 years in Sydney after doing a Masters of Clinical Psychology, and would have been about 14 years ago, I really started to focus on sleep because I realized it was just the crux of both health and mental health difficulties. And it's just so essential that we try to understand our sleep processes in order that we thrive and just as core preventive mental health care.
Okay. I was thinking that we could talk about maybe sleep certainty and sleep distrust. I thought that sounded interesting.
Yeah. See, this is it's an interesting issue because it actually raises that distinction between sleep deprivation and insomnia.
Yep.
That the sleep deprivation is the ability to fall asleep, but not enough opportunity, and it may be related to work schedules, rostering, insufficient time for breaks, or sleep in between schedules. But insomnia is plenty of opportunity to fall asleep, but seemingly lost ability to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And this is a difficult one because there are a number of situations where pilots have attempted to, given the space of time within, between their schedules or their shifts, to attempt to sleep, and found that it wasn't working for them precisely because there was some sort of time demand or limitation. So this is something that is just universal for us. This is us as humans, and unfortunately, it comes down to the key survival tasks of our brain, which are two, and the first one is to get us the sleep we need, but the second survival task is to get us away from danger, right? And if we think about which one has to be prioritized, it's always the second, right? Our capacity to go into fight or flight or sympathetic nervous system arousal has always been the most important thing for us humans to help us avoid predators. And this is unchanged from 40, 50,000 years ago. This is the oldest part of our brain. And I don't know if you may be aware that the brain evolved outwards to the cortex, but the midbrain is where we're talking about these core sleep-wake processes. And it's hard for us, but we need to actually learn to understand and accept those. And what it means is that our brain will always put aside its sleep processes of a circadian rhythm and our homeostatic sleep pressure buildup to get us away from danger. Now, the hard thing is when this translates to sleep on demand. And an example of that might be, because I've talked to a number of pilots now who are able to who can't fall asleep in a designated rest facility in a specific time period whilst they're flying. And I know I sympathize with people from smaller aircraft organizations because, they don't have the luxury of this. But even commercial pilots who have that designated rest facility and a certain time allocated to sleep in it may find themselves in that place with growing performance anxiety about sleep and frustrated wakefulness, knowing that they're in a quiet, calm, and dark situation and they're required to sleep for that period of time and they simply can't do it. But as soon as they get back to the cockpit, they start to feel sleepy, precisely because the demand is to stay awake. And at this point, it's the only way we can really reconcile this is to understand that our brain will pick up anything that looks like a threat and put aside sleep.
Right.
So this is the sleep anxiety issue that we were talking about.
Yeah. So this sleep anxiety, is it, do you think, a common occurrence in flight crew?
Look, if it helps, the neuroscientist Matthew Walker says 60 to 70% of the population has a difficulty falling asleep one night a week, every week. So every one of us has this capacity to, if we're under some stress, or even if it's our own internal threat of what if my brain doesn't get me the sleep I need, to build anxiety about sleep. And then our brain will follow that lead and put aside sleep to look for danger.
Right. It's interesting because I think from a pilot point of view, there's a lot of like split shift type flight and duty periods, where pilots will fly for a few hours, then they'll have a few hours break, and then they'll fly again until they end their duty period. So they have to have the sleep opportunity. How does this all fit into this sleep anxiety side of things, do you think?
Well, there's a couple of things in that, and it also includes the circadian and ultradian rhythms. So there's the physiology as well as the psychology in this. The physiology of having shifts that, split shifts that allow a period of rest and the expectation of sleep really needs to fit in with our what we call our ultradian rhythm, which is less than a 24-hour circadian rhythm, because that's related to our core body temperature. And relative increases in core body temperature are associated with alertness. Relative decreases in core body temperature are associated with drowsiness. So this is why there's an uptick in motor vehicle accidents if people are driving within the hours of 3 to 5 p.m. or 3 to 5 a.m., because those times are when we reach our core body temperature minimum for 3 to 5 a.m. or a dip in core body temperature from 3 to 5 p.m. that's associated with drowsiness. Now, if your split shift does not kind of coincide with that core body temperature drop, then you may miss the boat in terms of getting a chance to grab some sleep there. Now, then the psychological aspect of this is if there is performance anxiety about sleep and a generalized distrust in our brain's capacity to regulate sleep, then we may end up with the classic insomnia picture that looks like tired and wired rather than sleepy.
Yeah.
And what it means is your brain will seek for as much as it can to put aside sleep because there is an ever-present threat of not being able to sleep. And this is part of the paradox of insomnia, that the harder we try to get to sleep, the more effort we put into it, the less success we have. And the more our brain wants to put aside those sleep processes to look for threat. So this is the conundrum that we all as humans have to deal with. So there's two parts to that, both physiology and psychology.
Right. So perhaps you could just give us a bit of a background on circadian rhythm and how that affects sleep in particular.
So it basically, we're solar powered creatures, right? 82% of our body's tissues has a circadian rhythm, and this has been much researched in the chronobiology field at Surrey University over in UK by Professor Jan van der Dijk and his team, who have looked at the deleterious effects of not synchronizing our physiological rhythms with daylight, and or not synchronizing our social rhythms with changes in light and dark, daylight and nighttime. So one of the things they have noted, and some research that came out just at the end of last year, was that the all-important physiological recovery process of deep sleep really needs to happen in the darkness hours. And there's an incredible flushing process that happens by the glymphatic sewering system of the brain, whereby the space between the brain cells actually opens up and cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the brain cells and removes toxic buildup from that is accumulated over waking hours. This is very important for physiological recovery, tissue and cell repair, human growth hormone production. It's very important for us to have that deep sleep. And what they found at Surrey University is that if it doesn't happen during the nighttime hours, if it's attempted during daylight hours, the cerebrospinal fluid is diverted for other functions, and that flushing process does not happen optimally. And that's been suggested as the main mechanism for the long-term disadvantageous effects or damaging effects of shift work. Now, it's not there to, I mean, the hope is that this does not make people fearful, but there is a hope that industries are actually respectful of that and realize just how important it is for people to get an opportunity for sleep during the hours of darkness. So circadian rhythms are the foremost fulcrum of our sleep process. Everything in terms of our sleep starts and stops with the sun. The sun turns off our sleep in the morning by turning off our melatonin production, our melatonin sleep hormone production, just as soon as the merest rays of sunlight hit our closed eyelids, hit our retinal nerve and the retinal ganglion cells, and that goes through to this suprachiasmatic nucleus, a little wake-up clock deep in the brain, and turns off melatonin production. And then everything else starts up for the day. You get a cortisol pulse. It gives you the energy and adrenaline to start the day. And that optimally happens when you see the sunlight low on the horizon in the morning. So that early morning sunlight is so important for us to not only reset our circadian rhythm, but also reset our mood. So the sun is the starting point, really.
So is there like certain times where we need to be soliciting sleep from our bodies? Like, is there an actual sleep range that we should be trying to sleep within?
Look, normal sleep is a range. So anything from 6 to 9 hours. There are genetic short sleepers, people who genetically have refreshing sleep over 4 to 5 hours, and they don't seemingly have a need for further sleep. I see a lot of people in their 70s and 80s who have sufficient sleep in 4 to 5 hours and they have enough energy. I mean, they're not happy with it, of course, but they're generally not the people we're most worried about in terms of sleep deprivation, because they will fall asleep at, say, 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. And then even if they're awake at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., they've had their sleep need met. So, there is, if we can ensure at least that we give ourselves an opportunity to sleep that is somewhere between, to start as a starting point, 6 to 9 hours, and then look for our brain to give us the baseline. There are a number of practitioners who say 7 to 9 hours. Really, you should set yourself an opportunity to sleep between 7 to 9 hours that is sufficiently dark, quiet, cool, that you can optimize the entry into sleep.
And so, like we're talking about split flight and duty periods, the call for is quiet, dark rooms and temperature controlled and all that sort of thing. So what you're saying is you could actually synthesize nighttime sleep through that process?
Look, yeah, potentially. It's a difficult one if you've just come from a time zone whereby, which is, suddenly inverted, and your brain is expecting the old time zone with the light and dark timing that of thousands of kilometers away. So that will be persisting. Your brain will have an expectation of falling into sleep at the same time, which is, what jet lag experience is like. Now, it is possible to simulate that, and it may or may not work depending on the capacity of the pilot to allow themselves to sleep on demand. If people are quite flexible and they're not given to anxiety about it not working sufficiently or getting into sleep sufficiently quickly, then it may not.
And when you look at augmented flight crews, where you've got additional pilots for long haul flights and all that sort of thing, how does that all sort of fit into their requirements in terms of sleeping while flying, so to speak? During the flight, what can they synthesize a nighttime experience, in that sort of environment? And if so, how do they do it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a number of things that work with this, and I know that Qantas Charles Perkins Institute doing the Dreamliner research is looking at those 19-hour flights from the UK to Western Australia, and looking at pilots' chronobiology, the circadian rhythms, and seeing how they cope with various measures like darkening and pressure changes, and there's been some success about that. I think if you can take the anxiety, the sleep anxiety part out of it, there are ways that you can work within the relative dips and increases in core body temperature to give people pockets of sleep. They could have naps and be sufficiently refreshed by those. And you can use bright light to put sleep at bay, and you can use, say, melatonin supplementation and dim light to help draw someone into sleep. But again, there's no guarantee with it because of the timing of our circadian and ultradian rhythms and the core body temperature dips and increases around that, and also a person's own apprehension about whether their brain can be trusted to get them into sleep.
Yeah. So in terms of operating through the night time, and we quite often hear that term window circadian low. How does this like the stages of sleep impact on this, and where does that all sit in relationship to the the window circadian low, or the WOCL, as they say?
So with the circadian low, if we're talking about core body temperature minimum and the drops in core body temperature within that circadian process, then the sleep stages would optimally be, for a start, whether you fall asleep, this is according to Professor Leon Lack at Flinders University Sleep Centre, that whether you fall asleep at 11 p.m. or 2 a.m., you will experience deep sleep or slow wave or delta sleep first within that period of sleep bed, as they call it. So in 70 to 90-minute cycles, and approximately you go into and out of all the sleep stages, and with normal waking periods later in the night, but it's characterized by deep sleep or slow wave sleep that happens at the beginning of the night. And that deep sleep is specifically linked to how long you've been awake, not so much the sun. So how long you've been awake is going to direct how quickly and how much deep sleep you go into. So if you have accrued some mild sleep deprivation over multiple days, you will get comparatively more slow wave or delta sleep on those recovery nights. So that happens at the beginning, and then during the later part of the night, you spend more and more time in dream sleep or REM sleep, and about 60% of the night's sleep is stage 1 and 2 light sleep that is spread throughout the night, but again, mostly in the second half. So each one has important functions. That deep sleep, as I said, was really important for physical recovery, and the brain really prioritizes that. This is the stage of sleep that's very difficult to rouse from, but your brain has brilliantly evolved to, because we're very vulnerable during that period, so the brain has evolved to minimize that to 13 to 23% of night sleep. And then REM sleep is important for emotion regulation and memory consolidation. That's about 20% of the night's sleep. So if you miss the second half of the night's sleep, what you may have primarily missed in that loss of the second half is dream sleep, and you may be agitated or irritable because of the loss of that REM sleep. So there's some new research that's just come out in the last 2 months that shows just how aware we can be of the environment, and even self-aware during both stage 1 and 2 sleep and dream sleep. And it doesn't take much for our mind, if it's already a little hypervigilant, to start perking up at sounds that don't fit in during stage 1 and 2 sleep, which is, as I said, 60% of the night's sleep, and REM sleep. And if we hear noises, we may perk up and attune to those. And we see this in a sleep lab very often. We may interpret and misinterpret that we've been awake for that time on the basis that we've heard those sounds, and we rehearse them to our memory. So one of the interesting things we find in sleep lab studies is that people commonly misinterpret how much they're sleeping, so that their subjective report of time spent in sleep does not match the objective report. And it's so common, it's called sleep state misperception. And it generally is that people disagree with the polysomnography that says they have slept with insomnia is generally, not too different from normal sleep period, but people disbelieve that. So then the sleep might actually be quite, normal. They're not actually sleep deprived or only mildly sleep deprived, but people distrust that and they become worried about not getting enough sleep. And as Nava Zisapel from Tel Aviv University has found, people's subjective report of their sleep quality and quantity has health outcomes itself, not just the objective recording.
Okay.
So people's perception matters in this, in
Yeah.
terms of, their worry about it.
So I guess what you're saying is that if these sleep blocks happen in 70 to 90-minute segments, then there's got to be gaps in between all of that. How does that could be misinterpreted by people as being awake?
Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. We also see a lot of in sleep labs is an 11-minute wakefulness period will be interpreted by the individual as being over an hour awake. So we humans are generally very poor judges of time at night. And this is partly because we don't have a memory or awareness for the moment at which we fall asleep. And that's why microsleeps on the freeway are so dangerous. We think we will, and that's the difficulty. We think we're going to wake up in time, but once the homeostatic sleep pressure builds, there's very little choice you have in this. There are limitations on this, and your brain will just overwhelm you with a wave of sleep. And you will not be aware of it. The first thing we're aware of in a microsleep is when our head jerks back and we realize at that point, with maybe some shock, that we've just been asleep and we don't know how long. So as a result, we skew the data. Generally, as humans, we distort the data. So we think the waking time is a lot longer and the sleep time is a lot shorter. And we do that consistently. We certainly do that in insomnia and stateless perception.
Right. Rosemary, this is an absolutely fascinating subject. We've probably run out of time, but I'd love to talk more about it with you. But look, thank you so much for coming along and talking with us. And we look forward to hearing from you again, I hope.
Yeah, look, and I would have loved to have talked about the King Island pilot who fell asleep. If you can go to LetSleepHappen.com and just read the article I wrote about it, then and I think I posted it to LinkedIn too. It's a really interesting one that showed the onus was on the pilot to regulate his own sleep, and yet it's very human of someone to have an anxiety response to being, given very tight constrictions on, sleep on demand and being and having the responsibility to fall asleep during the day when it's actually quite difficult to fall asleep because those sun's rays are activating and your central nervous system and suppressing your melatonin. So it's very hard for someone to sleep on demand and in order to be ready for an evening shift or night flying. So we really need corporations to recognize that.
I think this is the thing, just before we go, this is the thing I think with the new regulations in Australia. It's very focused on both the pilot and the company having a level of responsibility in reporting fatigue and keeping managing fatigue in general. So these regulations in Australia come in in June, but again, they've yet to be seen how we manage it all. But look, thank you so much for the time that you've taken with us. And sorry, what was the website for your business?
Yeah, so if you just look up LetSleepHappen.com, and I have a number of sleep articles on there. There's a number I've also written about via LinkedIn. So I think it's an issue that's universal. I mean, this is, obviously pilots have a great deal of responsibility. And so it's important that aviation organizations are aware of, the limitations on this and the way, and just understanding how our brain works in protecting sleep. And very quickly, I've got an article on controlled rest in position that I think is a really important safety valve, because there's pilots who are unable to sleep in a designated rest facility, but then, paradoxically can come back to the cockpit and immediately feel sleepy because there is no longer that fear about falling asleep there. In fact, they have to stay awake, and that's the frightening. That's the thing that makes it possible to sleep.
Yeah.
So, I understand it. In some countries there is not crib, but if it's, I think it's, if that can continue, because it actually takes the fear out or anticipatory anxiety out of what if my brain can't do sleep in a designated rest facility.
I did mean to ask you about alcohol and how it affected sleep, because, some people say, I'll just have one drink, and some people say, one drink will never hurt you, but I'm sure it does. I'm sure it must affect sleep.
Yeah, look, that's a whole podcast right there, because alcohol is basically, you choose where you go with it, because it's a sedative hypnotic. It has the capacity to sedate, but only for a certain half-life, depending on the number of standard drinks you've had. And the difficulty is it actually reduces your deep sleep. So that all-important deep sleep for physical recovery and tissue and cell repair I was talking about, alcohol reduces it. And then, unfortunately, alcohol also suppresses dream sleep, which is really important for our memory consolidation, as I said. And as a result, over time, if you're doing this every night for a long period of time, you will find memory erosion. It creates a disrupted laying down of new memory, or what we call anterograde amnesia. And so over time, that affects learning. If you have disrupted laying down of new memory consistently every night, then it will affect new learning over time. So alcohol is, probably one of the worst things that one can do, even though it feels like it's appropriately sedating, because by the time you get to 2 a.m., you're suddenly in withdrawal, and people are, extremely awake, suddenly awake. Yeah, there's been a couple of Japanese studies that look at the linear relationship between number of standard drinks and sleep disruption, and of course it gets worse. But even at one, there's an issue. And what some sleep researchers are saying is, if you can ensure that it's like 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep, that you have that last drink, then maybe you'll have got it out of your system, but you may find yourself at that point in withdrawal, so it's going to be harder to get to sleep anyway. So I think the thing to remember about the central nervous system is that what goes down in terms of sedation has to come up when it comes to withdrawal. And unfortunately, that also means dream sleep rebound. That's one of the reasons. That's why people notice the very frightening, vivid dreams, maybe 3 to 6 a.m. after they've been drinking. And we kid ourselves as humans that sedation looks better than real sleep. And this is a perennial issue. It's also an issue for some of the benzodiazepine medications like diazepam that similarly affect both slow wave sleep or deep sleep and REM sleep. So, but alcohol, it does not help sleep.
Yeah. So pilots can be prescribed certain drugs for sleep, but it's usually a short-term fix. But that obviously then impacts on your deep sleep. That's what you're saying.
Well, this is the issue. The one that's most used is one called temazepam or diazepam, but temazepam is a benzodiazepine that is prescribed to as many GPs describe it, like short circuit, that the insomnia habit. But in fact, what it does is it tends to graft a pill-taking habit onto the existing insomnia habit, because there's a thing called attribution shift that happens very readily when you first take the dose after a few days or nights of sleep deprivation. When you sleep extremely well that first night, partly because the sleep pressure had been building up over periods of wakefulness and mild sleep deprivation. So unfortunately, people tend to seek the medications from their doctor after they've had a few bad nights, and then just as their brain was going to make up the difference and pay off that sleep debt with increased sleep hours on the third night, then that's when they take the medication and they attribute that good sleep to the medication. So the attribution issue is a big one because it makes it very hard for people to come off the medication. And Professor Malcolm Lada from King's College Addiction Centre over in London said that it's very hard to get people off a benzodiazepine once they started it. People tend to stay on the medication. And I think that attribution shift is a part of it.
It's a worry. Wow. Well, thank you very much, Rosemary. Thanks for coming on the show. And it's been fascinating. It really has been fascinating. No, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank you for
leave it
inviting
there.
me. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Grenville. Thank you.
We would like to thank our sponsor for this episode, FlightLogix, for their continued support during this podcast's production. FlightLogix, providing low-cost aviation safety department solutions. Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed our content, and if you're interested in learning more, feel free to find us at aviationsafetycommunity.com.au, or if you wish to continue learning more about aviation safety, please look at our previous episodes or our webinar presentation series. Thanks for listening.